The video you're about to see illustrates loosing and furling sail as we do it on the Elissa. As this involves going aloft, it's very important that we follow safety procedures. Before going aloft, it's imperative that crew members get permission from the mast captain mates or even the captain himself. We also have to ensure and check all our equipment, for instance our safety harnesses. We need to make sure that the rig is in a safe situation for going aloft and that will not cause the yards to move. That implies checking the braces, checking the main course lifts and the lower topsail sheets. Before going aloft, we also need to make sure that any equipment attached to our body is attached there securely, especially hats, sunglasses, etc. And it's always a good idea actually to take some water before you're going aloft because you so easily get dehydrated. So having followed all these safety procedures, I think we're now preparing to go aloft. As we can see now, the crew has climbed up the shrouds and is preparing to lay out on the yard. As each crew member lays out on the yard, they need to call out that they're doing so, that they're actually stepping on the foot rope, and they actually have to wait for the response of crew members there. This is a safety issue to make sure that everybody's aware of the fact that the foot rope will change as people step out onto the yard.
On the main lower topsail, laying on port.
Port on! And the main lower topsail, laying on starboard.
Starboard eye.
So they work them sail out onto the yard and they clip in. They clip in through the beckets from the belts they have on their harnesses, and they clip back in onto the belts. So they make sure they're in a safe working position. Then each gasket which secures the sail onto the yard has to be loosened by the individual crew members. The person in charge of this operation is designated as the yard captain. When everyone is ready and they have dropped their gaskets behind them, they're holding on to the jackstay with one hand, they have their elbow on the sail with thumbs out, and so at this point the yard captain calls out, "Let fall," in which case everybody keeping hold of the jackstay then lets the sail go.
Let fall!
Once the sail has been dropped and it's in its gear, each of the gaskets, which is now hanging down behind the sail, is pulled up behind the yard and passed through the jackstay and secured with a gasket coil. This is done for each gasket on the yard. The yard arm gasket actually is a special case, and in this situation the gasket is brought in two jackstay dogs and passed underneath the jackstay and secured with a gasket coil. Once all the gaskets have been secured, each of the crew members on the yard then unclips and works their way off the yard. The yard captain or each member of the crew is the yard arm. They'll be the last off the yard, and they will check to make sure none of the gaskets trapped any gear underneath the yard. As they do this as they come off. And as they lay off the yard, each person calls out laying off port or laying off starboard to let their shipmates know they're laying off and that the foot rope orientation is going to change. They, as in the case of laying on, they wait for the response of the crew already on the foot ropes before they actually step off. And that actually is a complete procedure for loosing a square sail on the Elissa.
Rolling home!
The crew is now preparing to actually furl the sail at the end of the day. So they're going to lay aloft and do a harbour furl. As in the case of loosing the sail, they also have to follow all safety procedures before laying aloft. Once they have climbed up the shrouds and they prepare to lay on the yard, each member has to call out laying on or laying off, so that their shipmates are aware of the fact that the foot ropes will be likely to bounce on them. So once everybody is in their working position on the yard, they'll each clip in through the becket and back onto their belt. Okay, once clipped in, each crew member will loose the gasket coil. The crew member at the yard arm will handle the yard arm gasket slightly differently. They will actually use the gasket to help lift the clew and attach it with a temporary tie onto the lift. This takes some of the weight off the clew during the furling procedure. Once the yard arms are secure, then the first part of the sail to be brought on top of the yard is the leech. The leech is found and then placed on top of the yard. After that, the bolt rope is pulled up and laid on top of the leech. The crew member can actually use their belly as a third hand in this situation to hold the pieces of the sail on top of the yard while they're working. So now the procedure for each crew member is to grab and pull together sections of the sail and place it underneath their belly on top of the yard. We keep on doing this until we reach the sailcloth, which is the change in the colour of the sail. Once the sailcloth is seen, the crew member holds onto the sailcloth edge and pulls that up and makes a bag of it. So this is the bag, and shakes this out. This is where all the sail and bolt rope etc. will be put. So once the bag is held up, all the sail and the bolt rope and the leech are then stuffed into this bag at the front of the yard. And then this is finished off by rolling that bag tightly around all the sail, all in front of the yard, to make this as tight a sausage as possible all the way along the yard. In this situation here, we are now ready to roll home. That is to bring the sail and put it on top of the yard. So each crew member uses one hand to hold onto the jackstay, then holding out their thumb and using their elbow, they hold on to the sail, put their thumb out, and the yard arm captain, when he sees everybody's thumb is out and everybody's got their hand secure on the jackstay, will call out, rolling home. And the point of this call is on the rolling. Everybody's preparing to pull the sail on top of the yard. At the word home, everybody pulls the sail on top of the yard at the same time. This distributes the weight of the sail and makes this task a lot easier. So once that sail is secured on top of the yard, then it now remains to actually secure it there with a gasket. The yard arm gasket is taken off its temporary hitch onto the lift and is spiraled in to a couple of dogs of the jackstay, and then is tightly spiraled side by side inboard, and the bitter end wrapped underneath to secure it. For all the other gaskets, they are simply spiraled in place tightly side by side inboard, and then the last loop is then secured underneath that spiral. This is done on both sides of the mast, so everybody gets this done completely at the same time, and the sail is secured on top of the yard. At this point, it's now time to unclip and lay off the yard. And as in the case of loosing, the persons at the yard arms will be responsible to make sure that all the gaskets have been secured correctly as they work their way in. And as before, as we lay off the yard, we will actually call out laying off port or laying off starboard, so that the person already on the yard knows that the foot rope is about to change. So this is done until everyone is off the yard and they're on the shrouds and they work themselves down to deck. Okay, as we've just seen, this is how we loose and furl sail on the Elissa. One thing we need to keep in mind constantly is the safety aspect of working aloft. Now that the crew are working their way down to the deck, we can see that this has been a safe and exhilarating experience for each crew member as they've got to climb aloft and actually loose and furl the sail in the traditional way. So this is all part of training for seamanship training on the Elissa.